When Premier League footballer Nicolas Anelka scored a goal, he celebrated with this gesture, known as the quenelle. To his amazement, he suddenly faced a barrage of false accusations that the gesture was somehow anti-Semitic. The quenelle is well known and widely used in France and other countries. It is an anti-establishment salute. The gesture can be traced back to the famous French comedian Dieudonne.
Je m'appelle George W. Bush. Se bâtit sur le plus gros génocide de l'histoire du monde, le massacre des Indiens d'Amérique, qui a jeté le bombe atomique sur des civils. Sushiman avons organisé l'attentat le 11 septembre.
Je me souviens de la directive de Sarkozy sur les CM2, là.
Voilà, bon, le rapport.
Bon, eh ben, il y a une deuxième directive,
ouais.
Et celle-ci, elle impose la présence d'un personnage de juif déporté dans tous les spectacles.
C'est la loi.
Mais bien sûr, c'est la loi! C'est comme ça!
Quoi, il y a des mecs qui mettent ça,
c'est pour que les gens n'oublient pas! Pour que les gens n'oublient pas!
Savoir ce qu'il ne faut pas oublier!
Mais que les juifs ont souffert, putain de merde! Ils ont souffert, les juifs, merde!
Mais les juifs, ils ont souffert autant que les autres!
Dieudonne is a strong critic of Israel and helped set up the anti-Zionist political party in France. In this episode, we want to find out what this gesture really means and why the authorities are trying to ban it. To discuss this issue today is Hafsa Kara-Mustapha, a journalist and an expert on the quenelle. I'd like to first ask you about the quenelle. Where did it originate from and what does it mean?
Well, the origins of the quenelle comes from a stand-up comic, French stand-up, who's been performing it for about 5 years now. So it's rather strange that it's all of a sudden become such a phenomenon. But the gesture actually, it's almost rude in a way because it's scatological in meaning, and it's a sort of two fingers to the system. And he's introduced it. He introduced it in his routine, sort of like I said, around 2009. As a two fingers to the French system, which has been trying to stop him from performing for over a decade now. And it's come from basically one routine that he performed 10 years ago, where he'd mocked a Jewish extremist settler. And he hailed what he at the time called the Israeli-American axis of good, mocking the infamous George Bush speech, which was the axis of evil. And since then, the whole French media apparatus came down on him like a ton of bricks, calling him inevitably anti-Semite.
So Dieudonne, he's famous for what kind of political sketches mainly? What does he do?
Dieudonne used to be sort of a rather popular comic, and he became prominent in France actually performing with a Jewish comedian, where they'd sort of swap roles. He would play the Jew, and his friend would play the black guy, and there was this sort of it was quite original for the time in France. And then they split. They all went their separate ways, and his material became slightly more political. He became sort of critical of various French politicians, but he also became critical of all sorts of minorities, including Muslims. In fact, he became critical after 2001 of sort of Muslim youths who were taken in by Islamist ideology. So that was part of his routine. And he mocked also Christian clerics. So as part of that sort of irreverent attitude to many within the French society, he chose to mock as well a Jewish extremist. Now, all sorts of extremists had been mocked before, and that had been perfectly acceptable, until obviously he touched the supreme taboo in France, which is Jewish extremism.
Why is that the case? Is there really a huge taboo in France not to talk about Zionism or Israel? or even Judaism, or
Very
anything to
much
do
so.
with the Holocaust, for instance?
I think France still suffers from what I would call the Vichy complex. Now, for those who sort of would know, France played an active role in deporting Jews during the Second World War. It was actually an ally of Adolf Hitler. And so this sort of remains a bit of a huge embarrassment for the French. And I'd say as a result, I think the French have created this sort of bubble of absolutely no-no, a bit like in Germany, but actually even more so than the Germans, because they have Europe's largest Jewish community, which is quite ironic because the majority of France's Jewish population is actually Sephardic Jews. They came from North Africa. So they're, funnily enough, not Jews who'd suffered the Holocaust. Nevertheless, there is this sort of idea that that issue is incredibly sensitive and cannot be touched. And so whenever anyone mocks it, or even challenges, maybe would discuss figures or anything, that comes across, labelled as anti-Semitism.
Very famously, Dieudonne, the French comedian, set up an anti-Zionist party.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, following his infamous sketch, which he'd performed on live TV, and the backlash he received as a result, he decided to sort of take a step further. He did what no other comedian actually did, which is the others that had ventured into the sort of Jewish territory immediately after being accused of anti-Semitism, sort of went on live TV, grovelling apology, and things moved on. He refused. He didn't believe that he'd made anything wrong. He had mocked a Jewish extremist settler in the same way that he'd mocked extremist Muslims or extremist Catholics for that matter. So he refused to apologise. And as a result, his sort of political career took a life of its own, really. And he created a couple of years later the anti-Zionist party.
Mm-hmm. What happened to that? Did he progress with this?
Not really. I mean, he didn't get any funding, which was actually part of any political parties do get a percentage of funding from the state. He couldn't get any funding. Obviously, the media turned against him, inevitably, once again, called him anti-Semitic for his political stance. So he really struggled to make a political movement out of it. Having said that, his notoriety did grow from this political movement. So even though it didn't really take off in political terms, in grassroots level, the persona himself managed to get a growing number of fans from this, and since then he's been performing to all sorts of audiences, on the back of this movement.
And his very famous gesture, which he's performed, is the Canal. For some people, that's just a gesture, as you said, it's an anti-establishment gesture. But the Zionists have been trying to say that it's somehow anti-Semitic. Why are they saying this?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. It's very, like I said, it's very ridiculous. He's been doing it. It literally is. It's inspired from a French dish called le quenelle, which is, like I said, scatological in meaning, and it is a two fingers to the system. And he's been doing it for 5 years now. He's been literally opening and closing every one of his shows with a quenelle. So to actually suddenly wake up to the fact that it could be anti-Semitic or Nazi-like is disingenuous, to put it mildly. I mean, but the thing that because it's taken a life of its own, really, he's become incredibly popular through social media. Now, he's been forbidden from mainstream TV, from mainstream media. So he's taken to the internet, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And he does these regular contributions on YouTube, whereby he attracts something like 2 to 3 million viewers each time. Mm-hmm. And he sort of threw a challenge basically to his fans, which was, I'll tell you what, let's get to do a canal in front of politicians, in front of, political buildings, ministries and everything. And he's managed to do that. All sorts of politicians have been what he called, they were trapped into having young, high school kids doing it in front of them. And it has become so popular, many people have done that. Now, how do you stop such a popular movement, literally telling the establishment where to go? And obviously it's Godwin's law, really. It's, get the Nazi card out. So,
this gesture, it's quite famous in France. Is it also famous in other countries as well?
Well, it's famous in Francophone countries, countries where Dieudonne performs or is famous. So in sort of he's performed in Canada, in Switzerland, he's very, very popular, Belgium as well, and North African countries, obviously, where they're bilingual, they speak French as well. So in all these geographies, the canal has become quite big, actually, yes. So people are sending him pictures of canals from everywhere.
And just coming back to the actual gesture itself, I mean, some of the stuff that maybe the establishment might say is it looks quite similar to a Nazi salute. But then you may argue, well, the salute that the soldiers give, for instance, when they do that, could be argued it's a sideways Nazi salute. So you can be very cynical about picking something out, when there's actually nothing to do with anti-Semitism.
Well, this is the total irony and if not ridiculousness of this accusation, because just this morning, actually, one of France's major dailies found that a shop which had a mannequin positioned in this way was actually had the police coming around to the shop owner telling him that his mannequin was doing a Nazi-like salute. This is the amplitude of this ridiculous accusation. Anyone, you scratch your head and it's going to be seen as a Nazi salute. It is, I mean, for those who know South Europe, there is a very popular and very rude gesture which is done by the French, by the Italians, which is a sort of hands-up gesture, similar to the two-finger salute, which is two fingers that is done in Britain. And so this is very similar, and it's very much inspired by that gesture. So to link it to a Nazi salute, it really is ridiculous and desperate, if anything.
And the French media, they've tried to smear him as much as possible.
Well, not just the French media, actually. This is one of the striking things about this whole affair. Since Nicolas Anelka performed it at the end of December, saying that he did it as a gesture, towards his friend, you'd see the evolution in the British press, which was first, Anelka performs controversial hand gesture. Nicolas Anelka performs Nazi-like hand gesture to it's throughout the week of the controversy. By the end of it, it had become Nicolas Anelka performed Nazi salute. So the way the media has sort of jumped on this and changed what is a completely innocent, if not rude, obviously, gesture into something completely different is astonishing. And it is symbolic of the power of how the media chooses to portray something that is ultimately, or somebody, such as Dieudonne, who's been very openly critical of, dare I say it, Israel, the big taboo.
Talk to us about how 2014 has become, if you like, dubbed the year of the Canal by Dieudonne and Dieudonne's fans. So this gesture by the celebration by Nicolas Anelka has actually given him a lot of popularity now.
I think it does. Yes, I mean it's made the Canal famous beyond French borders. I mean he's a stand-up comic, so inevitably he will only be known to his local audience or French-speaking people. And obviously now, since the Anelka controversy, it's absolutely it's gone global. What better publicity for Dieudonne? And I think that's another thing that is really grating the French establishment, is that their overreaction has actually given Dieudonne even more of coverage, even more exposure. So Dieudonne, as a result, has decided, this is a peaceful gesture. Let's make 2014 the year of the Canal. Let's get as many people as possible doing it in as many places as possible, just to show how silly and tedious it is to turn a hand gesture into something that simply is just a joke. Which
is actually also showing the great divide between the people on the streets, the youth as well, and the political establishment in France, mainly.
Absolutely. I think so once you read the papers, and then it's very interesting now, obviously with the internet, you read the articles and then you read the commentaries, and it's like two different worlds. So on the one hand, you still have newspapers claiming that Dieudonne is a has-been, his career is behind him and everything, and on the other hand, you see Dieudonne performing to sell-out venues. So the comments, most of them are in support of what he's doing.
Talk about, if you like, the disenfranchisement of the youth in France.
This has shown, first of all, that you can reach a global audience through very simple and pacifist ways, really. It's a hand gesture and it's a guy in front of a YouTube camera. So these are very simple things. Okay, he was incredibly famous and everything, but the movement in itself has actually spread essentially through social media. And I think it shows to the French youth who do feel disenfranchised that actually they do have a voice, and they're growing in numbers, and they're actually really proving to be a thorn in the side of the government, which is something they didn't know they could do. So in that sense, I think Dieudonne is waking up a lot of people. And a lot of his critics are saying that, well, he's sort of playing on the immigrants' main concern, which is Islamophobia, and obviously their stance on the Palestine-Israel issue. But it actually is a bit more than that. There is a sense of absolute impunity in France to those who are at the top levels of the system. And one of the main sort of representatives of this impunity is an organization called LICRA, which is France's equivalent of AIPAC in the US. It's a very strong, very powerful pro-Israeli lobby that can literally get away with anything. And when I say anything, I almost mean murder. We've had cases of people who have committed serious crimes and who haven't actually been taken even to court. Some have managed to flee to Israel, and although there is an extradition treaty between the two countries, they haven't even faced any court procedure because they're supported by LICRA. And so this sort of level of injustice is becoming incredibly unpalatable to French people from all levels of society and from all ethnic backgrounds. And I think by Dieudonne having had the courage to speak out against it in a climate where it is an absolute no-no, has actually given hope to many within France that they can make things different and then just move things, basically.
And of course the government have tried to ban the canal. They're trying to silence Dieudonne, they're trying to ban him from performing. Are they going to succeed?
Well, this is really the big question now, because he is due to perform tomorrow. And the French Interior Minister, who do you think would have more pressing issues to deal with, has decided to ban him and issued a decree looking to ban him. So he has 3 lawyers now currently challenging this bizarre decree on the basis of basic freedom of expression, especially since his routine doesn't, now most of his routines don't even mention Israel or anything. So they're just, he touches on domestic violence, on sort of, he mocks everyone really. He hasn't even touched, in the routines that he performs in his material, he doesn't even touch on the sort of Israel-Palestine issue, which is the sacred one. So he's looking to challenge that decree. And there are strong chances that he will be performing despite that, because there is no legal basis to banning him on the basis of his incitement to racial hatred. So let's see tomorrow.
They've tried to convict him in court several times. That's not succeeded either over the past few years. Well,
they've literally tried everything, but over the past few years they have managed to. And one of the funniest stories actually was that a young Moroccan man was beaten to death and his body thrown in the Seine by 3 youths from the Jewish Defense League, which is a terrorist organization that is banned in the US and even in Israel, but actually can act in total impunity in France. And so these youths who were part of this league beat up this Moroccan family man and threw his body in the Seine. And when they were caught, they were sentenced to 18 months in prison. So Dieudonne was actually taken to court, and he's been convicted of something. I can't really remember what it was legally because it's so absurd. Simply because he said, well, if his murderers have been released, then why not release other murderers who've committed similar crimes? And that was actually considered anti-Semitic. So that is the level of absurdity within the French system of how the issue of anti-Semitism is blurred, and anti-Zionism, and all these organizations that are incredibly powerful. This is how much the system has managed to blur the line of what can be said and what can't be said.
This is quite different from, for instance, Britain. In France, why is it that the establishment, why is it that the government, are quite, if you like, afraid of the pro-Zionist lobby, so much so, I mean, more so than, for instance, here in Britain.
I mean, it's very bizarre because having, you know, I'm a fan of Dieudonne's material, and I think he's a very funny guy, and some of his stuff really isn't different to some stuff that you see Omid Jalili, for instance. You know, he's a bit slightly irreverent. He does touch on the ethnic jokes. That's very much what he does. So to actually see the backlash that, you know, comes from a routine of Dieudonne is very bizarre. I cannot explain the level, the level that these organizations have in the French system. I mean, I can, obviously, because we know that many who are linked to Lycra and to another organization called CRIF, which are the two most powerful ones, are actually, they're part owners of Le Monde newspaper. Mm-hmm. They own shares in TF1, which is the largest audience, you know, biggest channel in France. So they have strong links to the media. You know, it's a bit like here in Britain, whereby you wouldn't ruffle Rupert Murdoch's feathers. Mm-hmm. But Rupert Murdoch is just the one, whereas here you would probably have a plethora of people who are linked to Lycra, and who cannot be challenged, and these many within the political scene are just too afraid to go against their wishes and go against the grain, basically.
Now, you yourself have been campaigning on this particular issue.
Yes, I have.
Raising awareness. So tell us more about your activism.
Well, I mean, we're trying to sort of show that there is support beyond French borders here for Dieudonne, because I think he's, you know, he does need all the help he can get. He's called it himself a lynching, a media lynching, and he has suffered a lynching. You know, he's been attacked, physically abused. That is, his assistants have been physically abused again, and all the time, none of these people have been taken to court. So it's very strange. Every person who is associated with him has been attacked physically as well.
By who?
By members of the LDJ, which is the Ligue de Défense Juive, Jewish Defense League. There's a Jewish Moroccan activist as well, who's a close friend of his. He's been also physically attacked. He's 70, and he's been called traitor and everything, and had paint thrown on him. So everyone who's sort of, you know, people who've gravitated around him, shown support or anything, have actually even been physically threatened. And so I think it's, you know, somebody who has the entire French state apparatus against him, I think needs to have all the support he can get. And
tell us some of your, you know, experiences here in Britain, for instance. Is there now a growing awareness of Dieudonne?
Well, there is. I mean, it's difficult to kickstart things, because obviously British audiences just don't know what Dieudonne is, and those who've learnt from him really have picked it up purely from the Anelka controversy, which in itself has been portrayed as a Nazi salute. So it's very difficult to get people on board. I mean, the Daily Telegraph the next day actually reported it, a big headline saying disgusting. So he'd already been tried, and he'd already been considered an anti-Semite, without anyone knowing any of the background to what Dieudonne has done and what he's about. So it is very, very difficult to get things off the ground. But I mean, through my presence here, obviously, and through some of the stuff that I'm writing about, we're trying to get this message across to British audiences as well.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Hafsa, for joining us today. And that's the end of Panorama, but please join us again next week. Goodbye.